Unlike a lot of our demo videos that are 2 minutes long or so, this is actually going to be a deeper dive into squats. And this is really important to me for a few reasons. One is when we think about building strength through the quads, the hips, and the glutes, squats work really, really well. And squats come in a lot of different varieties. We can do them in different ways for different purposes. We can load them with different things. But it is important that we have a base understanding of why we squat, and then we can start talking about how we squat for different outcomes. And for today's purposes, I'm talking specifically about a bilateral squat where both feet are on the ground, we're moving the hips, right? This is a squat pattern for today. Things like lunges and split squats are squats in some ways. That's not the content here. What we're talking about is exercises where with both legs we're moving the hips maximally, and we're also bending the knees maximally. So why do we squat? Again, this is a great way to build strength and durability through the hips, through the legs, especially the quads. There's a little bit of hamstring engagement in a squat, but primarily as a stabilizer. It's not a prime mover for us, so we're not going to spend as much time there. Now, how far should we be squatting down? This is something that comes up a lot. I've heard lots and lots of different versions of like what counts as a squat. And it's not wrong to say that we should always be aiming for the same consistent, good, deep depth in a squat. However, not all of us can get there right away. So if you're working on squats, if you're newer to squatting, and you can only get halfway down, or you can't quite get your hip to pass below the height of your knee, which we generally consider to be full depth, at least in competition circles, that's okay. Give it time, practice it. But you might also need to change how you're squatting just because of the way that your hips or your thighs or your tissues, how things are built, right? So don't get too attached to any particular narrative. If you're having trouble squatting to what we'll call full depth, which is when your hip goes below the height of your knee, then that's something that you can work towards. And it's probably worth working towards it. If it's bothering your hips or your knees, please get some professional input, have someone take a look at how you're squatting, and do some work on this. Anyway, the last piece is to talk about ways of loading squats. What Susan and I are going to work on today is just going to be a goblet squat, holding a kettlebell up in front. Now we could hold a sandbag, we could put something on our shoulder, we could put something on our back, we could put something and hold it overhead. We could even do it without any weight. But for most of us, starting off with a kettlebell or a dumbbell held in front is a really good place to go. It's better than body weight because it actually gives us something that we can counterbalance against. And it's better than having something really heavy like a sandbag, or even having a barbell that we have to hang on to. Simply because that barbell adds more load and more movement dynamics, whereas holding onto a kettlebell or a dumbbell, or even just holding onto a backpack or a small child, all of these are actually really easy to manage and are easier to learn than working with a barbell. So there's our overview. Let's get into squatting. Let's get into squatting. One thing for us to consider when we start working with squats is that we can do, especially with kettlebells, and if you've looked into StrongFirst at all, you're going to see that goblet squats come in two varieties. One version of a goblet squat is what we call a prying goblet squat. Pavel kind of makes this analogy of if you were tasked with getting a big metal rod, like a pole for a sign, out of concrete, you wouldn't just try to pull it upwards. You would grab it, you'd rock it forward and back, left and right, you'd move it around in circles to try to break up the concrete that it's embedded into. That's the idea of a prying goblet squat. It's about getting into the bottom of a squat, moving around, finding some movement there. Prying goblet squats are great for mobility. They're really good for opening the hips. However, that's not how we get strong. Strength and flexibility actually kind of work in opposite directions. We like them to work together because that creates mobility. But if we just do prying goblet squats, we're not going to be very strong because we can't go very heavy with them. When we want to get strong with the squat, we're going to actually limit our depth. So let me just show you roughly what I'm talking about. So this is a 16 kilo kettlebell. I'm going to bring this guy up. I'm going to come down. My elbows are inside my knees. This is what we mean by a prying goblet squat. And we've got a demo video on this as well. Right? I can move around in here, pry into my hips, pry into my knees. This is how I open my hips up. However, if I care primarily about strength, I'm going to stop just after my hips come below my knees. And I'm going to move more consistently. So when we start talking about squats for strength, as we're doing today, this is different than a prying goblet squat. The two are related. We can use prying goblet squats to get deeper into our squats. But we are specifically talking about strength kind of squats today. Let's do this. All right. Let's dig into squatting. So the first rule that I want you to know is that there are no hard rules about a squat. Like, if you're not competing in powerlifting or in CrossFit, no one is going to tell you how far you have to go down into a squat. There are some rules of thumb. There's some truth that a deeper squat is going to build more strength through your legs and through your hips because you are challenging the muscle through a deeper range of motion. But again, if no one's judging you, you don't have to judge yourself. There's no good rep versus bad rep. But squats should not hurt. If squats are hurting, general rule is we're probably squatting in a way that is not optimal for ourselves. So what I'm going to do is have Susan show us 3 different foot positions for a squat. We're going to talk about what works well and what doesn't work well in each of these for her and maybe for people in general. We're going to use this med ball, which is probably about 12 or 14 inches in diameter, which for most people is a decent height to ensure that we're getting to what we would competitively call full depth. Full depth generally meaning that your hip is going below the height of your knee. Your thigh has a negative cant to it, right? Like if you put a ball on the top of your thigh, it would roll towards your hip as opposed to towards your knee is a good sign of depth. So we're going to see 3 different ways that I know Susan can get to full depth on her squats, but we're going to take a look at these 3 and talk about what works, what doesn't, or even why we might want to pick one of these. So come on over and we'll just go feet parallel forward, the first one. So Susan's got her feet parallel, they're pointed forward, they're hip width. She's going to squat on down. So she can easily get to the ball. Getting to the ball is not a problem. She's got great balance, she's got good mobility. And next time, stay down for me. So a couple of things to notice, right? 1, her knees are tracking over her toes. And I don't mean that her knees are forward of her toes, they happen to be. And unless you've got ankle problems, there's nothing wrong with that. But what I mean is that the middle of her thigh is pointing in the same direction as the middle of her foot. That's a really nice anatomical alignment for the ankle and for the knee. The body really likes that. Here are the other things. She's leaned really far forward. Her shoulder is in front of her knee. Her shoulder is in line with her toes. She's hinged way forward. Is there anything wrong with that? No. Is this useful? Yeah, if you're a ski racer, you're going to spend a lot of time here. However, how much weight could she hold out in front of her like this? Not nearly as much as if her spine was more upright, if she was more vertical. Last thing, her hips are way back, which is a good sign that this is a very, very hip-dominant squat. Is that a problem? No, it's just a fact. Come on up for me. So let's go to a mid-wide stance, please. So Susan's feet are a little bit wider, her toes are turned out. Really easy rule of thumb is the wider your feet are, the more your toes need to turn out. If you go really wide and try to keep your toes pointed parallel, your knees are going to take a ton of rotational load. And there's one thing knees don't like, which is rotational load. Same thing, let's go through a few squats. And then on the next one, stay down for me. Okay, so let's just take a look at this again. Center line of thigh, still pointing out the center line of toe. Big thumbs up on that one. Chest angle, way less forward. Still pretty far forward, but way less forward than she was. This is a position where Susan could work on getting really, really strong. She's not going to be able to hold a huge kettlebell in her hands, but if she had a barbell on her back, that barbell would be over her foot. She could get really, really strong in this position. This version of the squat is really great for building both the quads and the hip, and the outer hip, the outer glutes. And unlike the very first version, which is going to be almost all quad. Now, is that a bad thing? No, but it's just a factor. Come on up for me. And then Susan, let's go to third position, super wide. Okay, guys, this one's going to look maybe a little bit funny. You might think to yourself, now why would anybody do that? Come on down. Okay, check number 1. Thigh, foot, alignment, yeah. She could probably create a little bit more external rotation, pushing her knee out. Great, that's going to light up the hip a little bit more. Come on up, let's just do 2 more like that. Great, pause on the bottom for me. Super upright spine, her shoulders are almost directly above her hips. If she wanted to hold on to something pretty heavy up in front, it would be way easier than the first version. But here's the other thing, with her feet in this position, and her knees wide, what muscles do you think she's hitting most? It's not going to be the quad, it's going to be the glutes and the hips. Is that a bad thing? No, as long as that's what you want to build. Stand on up. So of those 3 squat variations, which one's going to be the best for us for general athleticism? Version number 2. Because it's going to be the most balanced through the hip. It doesn't look a lot like skiing. We certainly don't run with the feet in that position. However, if our goal is to build strength to be a stronger runner or a better skier, it doesn't mean that every squat's going to look like those positions. Instead, we need to optimize the position for the thing that we want. So Susan, I'm going to have you grab the kettlebell, bring that guy up in front, we'll do a couple of goblet squats. So, kettlebell's up in front. Susan's going to come back to her athletic position, which is slightly open. This was version 2. Good. And butt's going to come back. Come on down and tap the ball. Come on back up. Good. One more time. Stay down for me. So again, full depth. Hip is below the height of the knee. So if this was a competition setting, yep, that's a full depth squat. But we don't care. What we care about, the reason we care about the depth of the squat, is that means that she's putting the knees through more flexion and she's challenging the quad through a longer range of motion. And if we want to make a muscle stronger or bigger or more resilient, challenging it through maximum range of motion is a really good thing. If your knee doesn't like it, then you need to adjust and maybe get someone else's eyes on it. A strength coach, a movement person, maybe a physical therapist, because this shit shouldn't hurt. If it does, please adjust. Stand on up for me. And then Susan, I'm going to have you rotate 90 degrees. Because there's one other thing I want you guys to see on camera. I have expounded and extolled the virtues of Susan's back. What you're going to notice is that she does a great job of keeping her head aligned to her shoulders to her hips, and she's going to have a little bit forward lean. That's fine, but we're not going to see the shape of her spine change at all. The last thing is she goes, I want you guys to notice that she initiates by pushing her butt back. She does not initiate with her knees. Butt first, knees second. Let's go. Good. Let's do 3 more. Forward lean, but there's no bend in the spine. Butt goes back to initiate, hips first, then knees. Good. To quote Kelly Starrett, tissues loaded first get loaded maximally. And the simple fact is that the muscles that control your hip are way bigger and way stronger than the muscles around your knee. Now, are there versions of squats where we target the knee and the quad? Absolutely. Hack squats, high on that list. A heel elevated goblet squat with the feet hip width in parallel is going to be much more quad. Here's the takeaway for you guys at the end of the day. 1, find the hip and foot position that is going to give you the best bang for the buck related to what you want to grow or get stronger. Most of us need to spend most of our time squatting in that athletic stance. Feet slightly wide, just outside hip width, toes slightly turned out. If knee is tracking straight over the foot, fantastic. We're golden there. We want to maintain balance from the front of the foot to the back of the foot. We want the spine to stay tall, long, abs engaged. If we can hit those things, then we can load a squat however we want. We can go with a kettlebell, a sandbag, a barbell in front, barbell in back. We can actually start working towards overhead squats, all off of that very, very same platform. One last thing before we go, let's just talk breathing through the squats. I'll have Susan grab her kettlebell, bring it back up in front. I'm going to have her really accentuate this. A good rule of thumb, we do not want to be breathing through the movement if we're loaded. We want to be breathing when we're up at the top. There is an asterisk to this, there are exceptions to this rule, but if we're working on getting stronger, especially if we're loading challenging weights, this is a good rule. So Susan's going to take a breath in, tighten her belly, hold it, come down, and exhale at the top. Good. And I'm going to shut up for a minute so she can do 3 reps and you guys can hear her breathe. Good. And when she goes to put the kettlebell down, arms go straight, deadlift it, butt goes back, spine is nice and long. Susan, thank you. Guys, those are our squats. Remember, find the version of a squat that's going to work for you based on what you need and the squat that feels good. If knee is tracking over the foot, honestly, you've got 80% of the things right. Belly braced, you've got 95% of the things right. From there on out, that last 5% is just something you've got to feel your way through. You can always find a coach. You can always reach out That's it. Let's go do some squats.